Ned Beatty as Bobby Trippe. Ned Beatty entered the world of cinema through the role of Bobby Trippe, an optimistic traveler hurled into a horrific tragedy deep in the wilderness. With a performance so brutally authentic it borders on haunting, he left audiences choking back tears at how fragile a human being becomes when confronted by pure evil. Bobby wasn't merely a character, he was part of Deliverance's soul, earning Ned Beatty the industry's deepest respect the very first time he stepped in front of the camera. But the stage lights could never hide the repeated fractures in the private life of such a gifted artist. A soaring career came with a harsh trade, peace at home, 3 marriages to Walter Abbott, Belinda Rowley, and Dorothy Adams, fell apart one after another under the pressure of the punishing filming schedule throughout the 1970s. While audiences celebrated his work in Nashville, 1975, and Network, 1976, back home, Ned Beatty faced extreme loneliness and a widening distance from his children. Most frightening of all, a real near-drowning incident on set in 1972 left lasting psychological scars, so that whenever he stood before rushing water, panic would seize him at its worst. The sharpest pain, however, wasn't in his career. It was the humiliation that clung to him because of that degrading scene in Deliverance. For 50 years, wherever he went, he was chased by crude jokes and indecent mockery from the public, turning a man's dignity into cheap entertainment. To protect a fragile sense of stability, he was forced to turn down countless high-value leading roles, confining himself to supporting parts to escape the glare of judgment. His later years became a grind of cardiovascular illness and severe weight struggles, the toll of exhaustion after more than 160 projects. In the 2000s, when his body could no longer withstand the camera's demands, he retreated into voice work, carrying an ache that never fully eased. On June 13, 2021, Ned Beatty quietly took his final breath at his home in Los Angeles. His silent departure closed the story of a life spent giving everything, yet marked by wounds that never truly healed. Ned Beatty's journey ended at 83, leaving behind a vast artistic legacy and immeasurable grief. He was gone at last, freed from the pain and the merciless whispers that had followed him for half a century. Though his body has returned to dust, the legacy of a devoted actor, one who bravely exposed the full range of human emotion, will endure. Audiences will always remember him, a legend who emerged from a violent river and lived on in the heart of cinema. Jon Voight as Ed Gentry. When audiences think of Deliverance, 1972, they can't forget the calm yet deeply haunted face of Jon Voight as Ed Gentry. With a bow in his hands and eyes etched with fear before the raging Cohahuasi River, Voight carved into film history the image of an intellectual man pushed to the very edge of survival instinct. The role didn't just bring him towering fame, it became the launch pad that elevated him into one of the most commanding icons of 1970s Hollywood. Yet behind the thunderous applause and the Oscar glow was a private life sinking into the suffocating shadow of collapse. The tragedy began when his career was rising, and his first marriage to Lori Peters dissolved into nothing in 1967 under the crushing pressure that followed the success of Midnight Cowboy. The loneliness only deepened when he entered his second marriage to Marceline Bertrand. They had 2 children, but emotional distance, along with the relentless filming schedule of The Odessa File, 1974, turned that home into a spiritual prison. In 1980, the fracture finally reached its breaking point with divorce, leaving Jon Voight with an unfillable gulf between himself and his family, transforming him into a solitary man inside his own spotlight. Cruelly, this was only the start of the darkest and most heartbreaking chapter, the brutal coldness of his own blood. His relationship with Angelina Jolie wasn't merely a family disagreement, it became a publicly bleeding wound across the media for more than a decade. After her 2002 accusation that her father had mental problems, Angelina formally cut ties and dropped the Voight surname. The pain of being rejected by the child he loved most drove him into utter helplessness. And it didn't end there. His body began to revolt as well. Spinal injuries from the 1972 Whitewater scenes and exhaustion on the set of Runaway Train, 1985, hardened into chronic back pain that tormented him night after night. In his later years, he was left wrestling with grinding physical agony, alone in a multi-million-dollar mansion, realizing that power and $55 million still couldn't buy a single hand to hold from his children or grandchildren. At 86, Jon Voight has stepped far back from the noise, choosing a slower life to reflect on a fate marked by upheaval. His personal story may read like a sorrowful song soaked in tears, but the legacy of his unbreakable Gentry will remain an immortal monument. The body may wither with time, yet his spirit and talent will continue to shine, proof of a devotion so relentless it hurts to behold. The brutal estrangement between Jon Voight and his daughter Angelina Jolie for decades has become a lightning rod for fierce public debate. Some people feel deep sympathy for an aging father left in loneliness, believing that blood ties deserve compassion, and that forgiveness should still be possible after the mistakes of the past. Others strongly disagree, arguing that the psychological wounds he inflicted on his children can't be undone, and that distance is the only way to reclaim peace. So what do you think? Is Jon Voight more to be pitied or to be blamed? Comment 1 if you believe in forgiveness, 0 if you stand with Angelina. Bill McKinney as Mountain Man. When people speak of the most terrifying villains in cinema history, Bill McKinney, and his role as the Mountain Man in Deliverance, still ranks near the very top. The predatory stare, the feral grin, and the sheer brutality radiating from that character sent a psychological shockwave through global audiences in 1972. McKinney wasn't merely acting, he fully inhabited the darkness, turning fear into an artistic standard few have ever matched. But the film's explosive success became an invisible chain tightening around Bill's real life. The public cruelly blurred the line between the man and the screen predator, subjecting him to insults and even death threats whenever he appeared in public. The pain of being rejected by his own home region, accused of staining Appalachia's image, drove Bill into a spiral of alcohol to numb his loneliness. 2 marriages, to Felicity, June Bach, and Janelle Booth, fell apart as he could not separate the role's toxic shadow from his family life. Psychological instability, along with decades of heavy smoking, began to ravage his lungs, leaving him frequently short of breath and exhausted, even on the set of Bronco Billy, 1980. The most brutal chapter arrived with age, and a death sentence in the form of aggressive esophageal cancer. The disease didn't just steal the distinctive voice that had helped define him, it turned ordinary eating and breathing into recurring physical torture. Bill was forced to spend the last savings he had earned from supporting roles to pay for punishing chemotherapy, yet hope dimmed with each wave of metastasis. In the grip of despair, a man who had worked across hundreds of projects faced his final days in financial hardship and professional oblivion. On December 1, 2011, at his home in San Fernando, Bill McKinney died at 80. His passing came in a silence that feels heartbreaking, closing the journey of a fundamentally decent soul who spent a lifetime fighting to scrub away the demon mask the world had strapped onto him. Bill McKinney is gone now, leaving behind decades of scandal and lingering injustice. He departed with a void in the realm of truly layered villains, but also with a deep well of sympathy for an actor who gave everything. The memory of the Mountain Man may still make people shudder, but today, remember Bill as an artist who sacrificed himself for the craft, a man who finally found peace after far too many storms. Billy Redden as Lonnie. Billy Redden left an eternal imprint on film history as Lonnie, the mountain boy with the unforgettable face and that piercing banjo sound. The moment Lonnie sits on a wooden chair and trades notes with visitors from far away has become an iconic symbol, capturing Appalachia's raw beauty and haunting mystery. Without speaking a single line, the 16-year-old boy on screen created a strange magnetic pull that helped turn Deliverance into an irreplaceable masterpiece. But fame arrived too fast and gave Billy no comfortable life, only long years of ridicule aimed at his appearance. After the film's release, he became a target of cruel gossip, treated as a symbol of backwardness and otherness. More painfully, even as his image spread across newspapers worldwide, Billy never received the kind of fair royalties that could have secured his future. For decades back home in Clayton, Georgia, the star of a film that earned 3 Oscar nominations worked hard manual jobs, washing dishes, waiting tables, for meager wages. Hollywood had extracted the value of a local boy's image and then abandoned him to poverty and lack, to the shock of those who had once loved the movie. Even harsher was the way Billy was nailed to a single type, turning every attempt to change his fate through cinema into smoke. The industry largely ignored him, with directors calling only when they needed someone odd, quiet, and strange. In his later years, his net worth was reportedly only around $100,000, a painfully small figure compared with the fortunes of his co-stars. Living single in a small house in a poor rural area, he faced deep isolation and the sorrow of realizing that yesterday's glow had hardened into bitter memory. In 2012, during a documentary, he broke down in tears as he described feeling like a puppet, used for the audience's amusement and then thrown into the darkness of forgetfulness. Billy's old age became a quiet, mournful song as he learned to accept that he would forever belong to film history and yet feel rejected by that very history. Billy Redden still lives a low-key life in Georgia, carrying the weight of being a cultural symbol. His personal life has been filled with hardship and loss, but that banjo sound remains immortal in the river of cinema. Look at his journey with respect and compassion, because Billy didn't simply play a role. He lived a lifetime helping preserve the soul of the land he always loved. Ronny Cox as Drew Ballinger. Ronny Cox carved into fans' hearts the image of Drew Ballinger, the artist with a pure soul wandering through a forest ruled by cruelty. No one can forget the moment he cradled his guitar and, alongside a mountain boy, created the spellbinding yet ominous dueling banjos. Drew is the human heartbeat of Deliverance, a man who tries to connect through music only to meet the most tragic ending of that fateful journey. Behind his remarkable rise, from a local stage actor to a Hollywood name, were real-life silences soaked in tears. While working on major projects like Beverly Hills Cop, 1984, and RoboCop, 1987, he was swept into a relentless grind, forced to live away from home for months at a time, missing the milestones of his 2 sons' childhoods and leaving his wife, Mary Cox, to carry the weight of daily life alone became a quiet, lingering ache inside him. The pressure of protecting privacy in a scandal-hungry Hollywood meant his only marriage was constantly tested by distance and the fragile need for understanding. The darkest turning point struck in 2006 when Mary Cox died suddenly, on the very anniversary of their first date's 50th year. The loss shattered Ronny completely, pulling him into a gloom so deep he began rejecting even his own celebrated career. He turned down as much as 90% of acting offers, including heavyweight roles such as Captain Jellicoe in Star Trek, because he could not bear facing a camera without the eyes of his life partner watching over him. Instead of spending his later years in triumph, he chose a kind of self-exile on little-known folk music roads. At 87, even with an astonishing pace of more than 100 shows a year, it is, in truth, a desperate attempt to outrun an empty house, one where every corner still echoes the woman who is gone forever. Ronny Cox continues to write the final chapters of his life through the plain, honest sound of an acoustic guitar, carrying Mary's memory from town to town. The glow of cinema may have faded into quieter, mournful folk songs, but the spirit of a true artist in him has never gone out. And when the last note finally falls silent, the legacy of a kind-hearted Drew will remain, an enduring reminder of the love he gave to his wife and to his art across a lifetime of unwavering devotion. Charley Boorman as Ed's boy. Charley Boorman stepped into cinema at just 6 years old, appearing as Ed Gentry's son in the deeply emotional closing moments of Deliverance. With his innocent face and clear, unguarded eyes, young Charley became a symbol of peace, a safe harbor the burdened men longed to reach after the nightmare on the river. That first role was more than a family connection under the direction of his father, Jon Boorman. It was a doorway into an artistic world as mesmerizing as it is dangerous. Living in the shadow of a famous director's son, Charley carried crushing psychological pressure, along with severe dyslexia from childhood. Letters seemed to dance on the page, turning school and script reading into a humiliating obstacle, and pushing him to mask insecurity through reckless, high-risk adventure. His extreme love of travel, seen in projects like Long Way Round, 2004, cut deep fractures into his marriage to Olivia Payton. For decades, his constant absence from home left him haunted by guilt for leaving his wife to shoulder the work of raising their children alone. And out on remote roads, from Africa to South America, he was often thrown into identity crises, struggling to earn recognition that belonged to him, not to the massive shadow cast by his father. Fate, with cruel irony, drove Charley into direct confrontations with death just as he reached adulthood's prime. In 2010, a sudden diagnosis of testicular cancer struck like a fatal blade, forcing a man who once treated the world as his home to lie motionless in a hospital bed, terrified by life's fragility. He had barely regained his footing when a horrific motorcycle crash in Portugal in 2016 crushed his legs, turning a free-roaming nomad into a disabled man in an instant. The long road of rehabilitation became recurring physical torture, dozens of surgeries and pain that tore through him like knives. Having to relearn how to stand and walk like a child in middle age was a brutal blow to the pride of a man who had built his identity around strength. Seeing the bright-eyed Ed's boy of long ago now carrying a body marked by scars and reinforced by metal is a tear-soaked contrast, a portrait of time and destiny at their most unforgiving. Today, Charley Boorman continues to move forward with unwavering persistence through his humanitarian work with UNICEF, turning life's scars into fuel for global awareness of men's health. He is no longer the quiet boy waiting on the riverbank. He has become a symbol of resilience. Hollywood's shine may fade, but Charley's extraordinary will to live remains a powerful legacy, reminding us that life truly becomes radiant only when we dare to walk straight through our deepest pain. Burt Reynolds as Lewis Medlock. Burt Reynolds stormed into the minds of 1970s audiences as Lewis Medlock, the muscular hunter, the swaggering guide who led a fateful expedition into the wild. His steely gaze and iron nerve against the river's violent current helped turn Deliverance into a survival masterpiece. Lewis wasn't just a character. He was the peak of raw magnetism and untamed strength, making Burt a box office guarantee in that era. But beneath that rugged exterior was a body slowly breaking down, and emotional fractures that stretched across decades. Fame didn't bring him peace. His first marriage to Judy Carn collapsed after only 2 short years. Physical pain began to lodge itself into his life from that reckless whitewater leap in 1972, leaving him with a permanent tailbone fracture and spinal pain that tormented him for 46 years. The deepest humiliation came with his costly divorce from Lonnie Anderson in 1993. Dirty legal battles and crushing debt that forced him to file for bankruptcy in 1996, a staggering $10 million, even though he had once been one of the richest actors on the planet. Yet the true cruelty revealed itself as time began stripping away what mattered most to a god of strength. An accident on the set of City Heat, 1984, shattered Burt's jaw, pushing him into years of tightly held painkiller dependence as his powerful frame gradually wasted away. Regret, too late, too heavy, over losing the one love he truly cherished, Sally Field, kept gnawing at him in solitude. In 2009 came the sentence of prostate cancer, followed by heart surgery in 2010 that drained whatever remained of his strength. Watching the former Lewis Medlock struggle to move, breathing in broken intervals, his face hollowed by illness, was a devastating contrast. He died suddenly on September 6, 2018, from cardiac arrest, leaving unfinished scenes and an estate shadowed by debt, closing a life of devotion that felt almost merciless. Burt Reynolds took his final breath in Florida, ending the turbulent journey of a legend. He departed in quiet, far from the media storm and the debts that had circled him. His legacy is more than film. It is a lesson in the price a star can pay after burning himself out beneath the brightest sun. Herbert Cowboy cowered as Toothless Man. Herbert Cowboy Coward etched his name into cinematic history by bringing to life one of the most haunting villains ever captured on film, the Toothless Man. With a twisted grin and the chillingly iconic line, "He got a real pretty mouth." He redefined the meaning of terror in the great wilderness. Cowboy didn't rely on formal training. Instead, he brought the raw, untamed essence of the mountains to the screen, transforming himself into the ultimate embodiment of dread for anyone who witnessed that ill-fated journey down the river of death. Global notoriety did not usher this mountain man into a life of luxury. Rather, it plunged him into the depths of financial hardship. Once the cameras stopped rolling, Cowboy was forced back into a grueling reality at the BASF factory. There, he spent nearly 30 years laboring in a toxic environment for meager wages. His first marriage crumbled under the weight of economic strain and the instability of performing far from home at the Ghost Town in the Sky theme park. Bitterly, his own community viewed him with disdain, accusing him of tarnishing the image of the Appalachian people. He lived amidst the cold indifference of his neighbors, a man isolated in his own birthplace, carrying the heavy burden of an icon defined by hatred. The cruelty of fate struck hardest in his final years as his health withered, ravaged by decades of manual labor and stunt-related injuries. Hollywood had extracted every drop of value from the Toothless Man while providing almost nothing in residuals, forcing him to rely on small-scale appearances just to survive in his twilight years. However, the ultimate tragedy struck on January 24, 2024, in North Carolina. A horrific traffic collision claimed Herbert's life instantly at the age of 85. In a heart-wrenching twist, his longtime partner Bertha Brooks and their small pets perished alongside him in the wreckage. The artist who once made the world tremble on screen met his end in the most violent and tragic manner on a lonely road, without the chance to utter a single parting word. Herbert Cowboy Coward has left this world forever, leaving behind the echoes of a legendary role and a tear-stained conclusion. He has finally shed the heavy yoke of a hard-earned life and the harsh prejudices that besieged him for half a century. Although his fame was rooted in fear, let us now remember Cowboy as a devoted soul, a man who lived and died amidst currents as turbulent as the river that once made him famous. Macon McCalman as Deputy Queen. Macon McCalman left a deep imprint as Deputy Sheriff Queen, an emblem of law and measured calm in the haunting finale of Deliverance. With a stern face and restrained acting, he offers a temporary, almost deceptive sense of safety to men who have just crawled back from a living hell. Though only a small link in the chain, Macon's presence is essential, completing the film's blurred portrait of where crime ends and justice begins. Yet Broadway's bright lights could never fill the vast emptiness in the private life of this devoted artist. Macon and his wife, actress Pat McCalman, stayed together across decades, but carried an endless sorrow, a home forever without the laughter of children. That loneliness grew more suffocating as he was repeatedly pulled into long tours and punishing shoot schedules for projects like Nashville, 1975, and Smokey and the Bandit, 1977. The prolonged separations stole ordinary family moments, turning their house into little more than a temporary shelter. Unsteady finances in expensive cities forced him to work beyond his limits, planting the seeds for severe illness quietly tearing through his body. Cruelly, just as his name began to rise after falling down, 1993, a violent heart attack in 1997 drew a hard line under his golden years. The after-effects of decades of cigarette abuse led to chronic respiratory failure, making every breath a painful battle. His final years became a relentless cascade of tragedy as repeated strokes stripped away his ability to move and to communicate. The gifted artist who once commanded stages and screens was now forced to live dependent on medical care, his mind trapped inside a failing body. He had to leave the film capital behind and return to Memphis, fading from the memory of the public. On November 29, 2005, Macon McCalman took his last breath after a severe stroke, closing a life of dedication in a silence so numbing it felt like a star going out in the dark. Macon McCalman is gone now, released from the suffering of illness and the lonely years back home. He left this world the way he so often appeared on screen, quiet, humble, yet carrying immense weight. Though his body has returned to dust, the legacy of a true actor, an unsung giant of supporting roles, will endure in the hearts of those who cherish cinema at its most honest. Seamon Glass as first Griner. Seamon Glass left a lasting mark on audiences as first Griner, the mountain man with a hard glare and the rugged, weathered look so closely tied to Appalachia. His quiet yet threatening presence helped build the suffocating tension that hangs over the first half of Deliverance. Even with limited screen time, Seamon's harsh, craggy face became the perfect piece of the puzzle, proof of the rawness and danger lurking beneath those vast green woods. Behind those gritty frames was the exhausting grind of an actor who never once got to touch A-list glory. Seamon Glass lived through unstable years, juggling tiny roles with back-breaking manual work simply to survive. Acting alone couldn't feed his family, forcing him to spend months at sea while working port patrol. That long absence carved a gap he could never repair with his wife, and by the late 1970s, his home had completely fallen apart. The pain of being forgotten when he left, unnoticed when he returned, turned him into someone displaced, an invisible ghost inside the very life he had once fought to build. The darkest stretch arrived when physical limitations began stripping away his professional pride. Partial hearing loss made filming The Other Side of Hell, 1978, brutally difficult. He couldn't clearly hear the director's calls, turning each scene into psychological torture. The strong body he once relied on also started to break under the pressure of harsh night shifts at the Santa Monica Harbor, damaging his lungs and joints in severe ways. Hollywood's cruelty showed itself as he grew older. His body could no longer match the demands of set life, and the industry slowly looked away. Loneliness reached its peak as he watched colleagues from his era pass on one by one, leaving him to live quietly alone in a small room in Los Angeles. On July 12, 2016, he took his last breath at 91. His death came in complete silence. No fanfare, no headlines, closing a life that spent far more time enduring than enjoying the rewards of art. James Dickey as Sheriff Bullard. James Dickey appeared in Deliverance not only as the author of the original work, but also on screen as Sheriff Bullard, the lawman whose skeptical gaze closes in at the film's end. With a face that carries authority yet hides a quiet haunting, he becomes the bridge between literature's raw violence and cinema's merciless reality. In that brief role, audiences could recognize a razor-sharp mind, one that dared to expose the darkest corners of human instinct in the wilderness. Yet behind the honor of being appointed a major prize-winning poet in 1966 stood a spirit slowly wrecked by dependence on alcohol. For decades, endless drinking turned a brilliant artist into a tyrant within his own home. His 28-year marriage to Maxine Wright collapsed under the weight of infidelity and episodes of mental loss of control. The unraveling didn't stop there. When his second wife, Deborah Dodson, died suddenly, James was left sinking into severe depression. He thrashed between towering prestige, chosen to write a poem for President Jimmy Carter's 1977 inauguration, and the growing chill of colleagues who pulled away, unable to endure the extremity of a genius destroying himself. The peak of his pain arrived when his son, Christopher Dickey, publicly released a memoir that exposed his father's hidden failures, turning James into a lightning rod for public condemnation. At the same time, his health sentence began its final sweep. Years of substance abuse led to a brutal form of pulmonary fibrosis, making every breath a desperate struggle. The tall, broad-shouldered man who once seemed so vigorous was now ravaged by severe liver failure, his skin turning yellow and his body wasting away. In his last days at Columbia Hospital, he fought through heartbreaking gasps for air, eerily like his own characters battling the river of death. Even in exhaustion, James still tried to stand in the lecture hall at the University of South Carolina until just 6 days before he died. On January 19, 1997, the heart of the celebrated poet stopped at 73, ending a life that burned brightly, yet was scarred beyond cleansing. James Dickey has now left this world behind, leaving pages of fire and a life knotted with contradictions. He departed, finally released from his mistakes and the crushing tightness in his chest that tormented him for so long. His legacy, from immortal poems to the figure of Sheriff Bullard, will remain a permanent thread in American cultural history. Remember him as a giant who dared to stare straight into darkness and offered the world masterpieces in return. Deliverance ended long ago, and the violent river has faded into the past. But the harsh sentence its cast carried still leaves us shaken. They drained their bodies and souls for art, only to face later years filled with pain and isolation. Among the fading glow, whose story touched your heart the most? Share your thoughts in the comments and hit like so we can light a candle of remembrance for these unforgettable legends. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep traveling back through memory together, honoring the stars who spent their lives warming ours.